What was the scariest we need to leave, now gut feeling that you've ever experienced? Serious. You/Carisgal responded. Years ago, before cell phones, I was driving home from dropping my husband at the train at 4:30 a.m. Only me and one other car on the road. He started turning where I turned twice, so I didn't go home. I went to an all-night gas station and called the police. I gave them a description of his car. 3 weeks later, he was arrested. Turns out he was following women home and driving past their house and doubling back to rape them. No one had noticed his car. I'm glad I paid attention. You/Silversitimtal responded. Years ago when I was still living at home with the parents, I drove home around 2 a.m. As I parked my car, I noticed a man walking down the street. I decided to wait until he passed my car and was far enough for me to get out. However, instead he passed my car and hid behind the van that was directly parked behind me. I guess he did not think I was paying attention to him. So I called my dad, who was asleep, to come down and get me. He did, and when the guy saw my dad, he immediately ran away. I was lucky. You/Nikali responded. I bartend, and years ago I kicked this guy out because he was acting very strange, muttering under his breath that he would kill my other customers, just really hostile. He had missing fingers on one hand and he was kind of a bigger guy. After bar close I was almost finished counting money, so like an hour after everyone left, and I was just about to leave and I had that gut feeling. I looked out the window and that guy was standing on the corner watching me in a ski mask. I know it was him because of the build. As soon as I grabbed my phone he took off, but the cops know who he is. Now he has a vendetta out against me and is well known around town. His fucking nuts. You/odd_llama 800 responded. Wednesday midday, run along a beautiful river pathway near my apartment block. About 1 kilometer in I felt people watching me and directly turned around and ran home, even though I did not see anybody. Closed the 2 magnetic gates leading up to my door and didn't see anybody around or follow me. About 10 minutes later 2 guys were at my front door trying to push it in. I was luckily on the other side of the door at that moment and pushed it back closed with all my force and began screaming. I managed to security lock the front door and text my apartment block for help. I was on the 2nd floor, and they obviously watched which apartment I went into. Looking back at the apartment security cameras, they were able to see the 2 guys pull apart the magnetic security gates, 2 of them. The block then quickly changed the gates to a mechanic lock that cannot be pulled apart. You/Tommyonrhythm responded. Sitting in my friend's backyard with their 2 kids, my husband, and another friend, enjoying pizza that my host made. It was a beautiful, clear day with no real wind. We're having a great time, just out of the pool and hungry for pizza, when I suddenly felt on edge. I looked straight at the kids, about 8 and 10 or so years old, and just said, "Get in the house." We all scramble, and a second later we heard creaking, and maybe 5 seconds after it started, this big branch fell off of their pine tree onto the table where we were sitting. Thankfully no one was hurt besides having to pick pine needles out of our pizza. I can only assume that I subconsciously heard the branch starting to give. You/Willowed Wisp responded. Doesn't I need to go home now feeling count? And it wasn't me, but my mom. Anyway, I was around 12 or so and my mom left to run an errand, leaving me alone. Very soon after she left, the doorbell rang. This was weird because we lived on a hill with only 2 neighbors, we all kept to ourselves, and we just didn't get random visitors. Thanks to some conveniently placed picture frames, I could see out the door without being seen. I look out and see a young man I don't recognize. He's dressed in a t-shirt and jeans and something just feels off. So I'll ignore him and wait for him to leave. But he doesn't. He lingers and starts smoking. Again, this is an isolated hill, I'm alone, and now I'm getting scared. I go and hide and plan to wait for my mom. Except she just left, had a few errands to run, and I couldn't reach the phone without the guy seeing me. As I'm trying to figure out what to do, my mom comes home. She runs in and asks if I'm okay. Apparently she got this random go home now urge. She hadn't even run her first errand yet but turned around immediately. Found the guy in our yard and asked what he needed. I guess he muttered something about looking for someone, or something to that effect, and my mom told him to leave. Apparently he was acting very strangely and made my mom nervous. You/Ambum3434 responded. My brother and I were kids, playing hide and seek in the front yard of our house. My brother was 3, and I was 6. My brother was supposed to be counting and finding me, but he was taking forever, so I peeked around the side of the house to see what was taking so long. He had lost interest in the game and was standing near the front gate, which led to the street. As I'm looking, I see a brown car pull up with 2 men inside. The car wasn't familiar, and neither were the men. They both got out of the car and approached my brother. They started asking him questions and moving closer to him. I remember feeling panicked. I had learned about stranger danger in school and knew this wasn't right. I ran around the side of the house, flew through the back door, and screamed, "Someone is trying to kidnap Steve." My dad didn't hesitate. He got up and flew through the front door. When the men saw my dad coming through the door, they bolted and peeled out. From that day forward, we weren't allowed to play in the front yard anymore. It's a really scary memory for me. U/winter_commercial 400 responded. When we were in our teens, my sister and I were walking our dog in our local forest area very close to our childhood home. We were about to leave and had just clipped our dog back up, when a lady appeared out of nowhere and started chatting to us. She was odd. She told us her dog would love some socialization with our dog and could we go back with her for 5 minutes. What I hadn't clocked, but my sister had, was that her dog was nowhere to be seen. The lady was almost rounding us up to head back towards the forest when, little did I know, my sister had spotted a van out of the corner of her eye. I was still oblivious at this point. Suddenly, my sister screams "Dad," and to our luck, my dad had finished work and was now out on a run. He starts waving and running towards us, and as we turn back around, the lady had vanished. My sister looks back over at the van and sees the lady closing the passenger door and it speeding off. Dog still nowhere to be seen. I believe we were minutes away from abduction. It was divine intervention that my dad happened to be at the right place at the right time. U/stillgot1111T responded. I was freshly married in my early 20s, living in Fallbrook, California. My husband, ex, was a Marine and was at work, and I was driving home from visiting family further south. In order to get into Fallbrook, you have to travel along this long, dark and windy street called Mission Road. It's already a super dark night, about 11 p.m., and it's a little foggy as well. I'm slowing down and coming around this slight bend in the road, and all of a sudden the hair goes up on my neck, and I feel incredibly anxious. About 5 seconds later, a young woman jumps out of the brush directly ahead of me, maybe 50 feet away, on the left-hand side of the road, while waving her arms in the air and gesturing frantically for me to pull over. I swerved a bit to the right, slowing down even further, but I did not stop. She was young, maybe early 20s or even late teens, and a little dirty, and I was immediately conflicted over continuing to drive. But something told me not to stop under any circumstances. I got further up the road, slowed a little more, and dialed 911 with one shaky hand. The dispatcher said she'd send someone to check, but encouraged me not to feel badly. Apparently there had already been calls about this girl over the last hour, and they were unable to find her when police followed up. I heard a few weeks later about some carjacking robbery attempts in the area. Very relieved, I listened to my instincts that night. U/Danivel responded. I was at the state fair with my mom and my best friend. And I were looking at the rides and the games. This creepy guy Abd, his blonde girlfriend, kept babbling at us about taking headshots and that he was a modeling agent. He just seemed off and really sleazy, and the girl was giving me the creeps, so I pretended that I saw my mom telling us to come and grabbed my friend and dragged her off. She was close to 5 feet 8 inches and not a small girl, 13 years old. I was 4 feet 9 inches and around 65 pounds at 14 years old. A few days later, there's a news story and rumors going around the school about 2 girls being kidnapped, assaulted and murdered. They were taken from the fair the same day we were there, just few hours later. The creepy couple were Gerald and Charlene. Gallegos, serial killers. U/Dibeka responded. A friend called me and said there's a wildfire 8 miles away. Can you help me move my horses? So, I drove down. She was wrong, it's 8 miles by car. Under 2 as the crow flies. We got the first set of horses out and down to another farm. The second set, I'm working on, and suddenly, things get quiet. It's as if the world stopped for a minute. I look at the horse and the horse looks like it's ready to run. I take a deep breath and suddenly, the noise comes back, the wind is hot AF. And the light changes. I told Sherry, the girl I'm helping. We gotta go now. No time to shove the horses into the trailer, they are smart enough to survive, and I let them loose. We run to the truck, and the barn is already on fire. Then, we get in the truck and notice the fire past us and is blocking the road. So, we jump out and ran to a small pond for the horses. And we dive in, hoping the fire doesn't burn us. It was about 20 minutes of hell. It might have been longer, IDK. It was insanely scary, hot and loud. We got rescued by the fire department's water-dropping helicopter. It landed in the field and pulled us in. We got lucky. The truck was burned to the frame. And the horse Sherry let go died. The one I let go survived but was burned. That's most likely the scariest moment. U/Tangerine 2539 responded. When I was around 9 or 10, my mom took me with her on a business trip to a nearby city. This is before smartphones, when you still had to MapQuest stuff. We were supposed to meet my mom's friend coworker at the mall for something. Since her friend had given her directions, we didn't bother going down to the hotel computer to print directions. I think there was maybe one there. This was around 2000 to 2001. We got lost and ended up pulling into a small storage unit place to pull out a map. It was just 2 rectangular buildings, maybe a total of like 20 units. I don't remember why, exactly, but I was really scared and kept crying and asking if we could just go back to the hotel. I assume she got fed up with her kid crying in the passenger seat and she couldn't quite figure out where we were, so we went back to the hotel. The next day they found the bodies of 2 teenagers in one of the units we pulled in front of. U/Miss Rothmar responded. Back in 2019, my husband and 2 girls aged 6 and 9 were on a road trip in the south. We had booked an apartment in Atlanta through Airbnb without knowing the neighborhood at all. It was bad, really sketchy, with a lot of creepy-looking people hanging around. We went into the apartment, and immediately my 6-year-old said, "I don't like it here." The door didn't lock properly. The beds were dirty, there was rotting food in the fridge, and the bathroom had not been cleaned in ages. My husband called the owner, who was furious and refused to give us a refund. To de-escalate the situation, my husband offered to not leave a negative review if we could just get our money back. The owner agreed, but asked us to wait for him so that they could talk about it in person. As soon as he hung up, I told my husband that we needed to leave. Now, we hurried to the car, and as we pulled out of the parking garage, we saw the owner driving up with 4 friends. He didn't see us and we bolted out of there. Ended up at a hotel on the 14th floor, didn't even feel safe at street level. U/Dr_Spaceman responded. I was hammock camping while riding my motorcycle through Arkansas. I had a dream that I was getting pulled over by the cops on my bike. The flashing lights were super bright in my eyes. And as I woke from my dream, I noticed my blue hammock tent is lighting up like flashing police lights. I immediately felt an adrenaline spike and went into full flight mode. Packed my shit up faster than I could even put my boots on. Hopped on my bike in my underwear and rode a mile to the top of the campground where the showers were. The second I stepped into the shower cabin, the sky opened up and cloud-to-ground lighting started striking trees in the campground every 10 to 15 seconds. I could have been royally fucked up by a lightning strike had I stayed sleeping between 2 of them. U/Fury 161 Houston responded. Grew up along the Gulf Coast. Daily storms in the summer were normal. We were heading home when one came in really quick. All of us were elementary or junior high age. We were crossing 2 wide-open football fields. All of our hair was standing straight up in the air. We knew that meant lightning was imminent. A car was driving past, jumped the curb and drove up to us. We all got into the car and she slowly rolled back to the street. We went another block. And the lightning struck the goalpost. It was so close. Was never afraid of lighting until then. That was around 1979. I'm 57 and don't mess around. U/Team Brenda Walsh responded. I had a 9-month-old baby at home and didn't go out much, and one of my friends was in from out of town and asked if I wanted to see a band, whose members were people I knew socially from college. I said sure, that will be fun. I met her and a bunch of people at a bar across the street before the show and had a nice time, but got a feeling that I should go home. My husband was at home with our baby and wanted me to have fun, and I was, but I had a bad feeling to just leave. I said my goodbyes and left. There was a shooting at the bar that night. No one I knew was hurt, but they were locked in the bar for hours and it was terrifying for them. I'm glad I trusted my instincts. U/ZestyGolf 7654 responded. Years ago I was at a club with some friends. I was at the bar and for some reason looked down at the other end of the bar and saw 2 guys quietly arguing. They tried to keep from being overheard, but I saw their agitated face. I went back to my group of friends and told them we should go. This was a popular club and it took us forever to get in, so they didn't want to leave. I don't know what came over me, but I picked up my friend's girlfriend, she was barely 5 tall, and started walking to the door. She was kicking the entire time and the rest of the party followed me outside telling me to put her down. When we got outside, we heard the distant pop-pop and people screaming. We looked at each other for a second, then ran for our cars. I forgot to put her down and was still carrying her over my shoulders. Update. Dang, I didn't think this would blow up. It was the early 1990s and we were at a club in Miami. If I recall correctly from the local news, it was a drug deal that went bad between two groups. No one was killed, but they wounded each other and a couple of innocent people. Hank Scorpio PR responded. I was an infantry platoon leader in Afghanistan. One night we were on a foot patrol along the outskirts of a town where we were concerned about Taliban activity. I decided to move in closer to get a look at the place without worrying about the people of the town coming and going, which is always stressful. It was about 3 a.m. so everyone was asleep. It was completely silent. My interpreter carried an FM radio that he used to monitor non-secure traffic, which is how the Taliban tended to communicate back then. We hear something in Pashto on his radio, and he very calmly turns to me and says, "Sir, they are saying, the ambush is set." I immediately got on my radio and told my squad leaders to halt, and we pulled back and got the hell out of Dodge. That was probably the most pucker I have felt in combat. I am convinced that interpreter saved several lives that night, and when he messaged me during the fall of Kabul asking if I could get his family out, I called every contact I could think of to make sure he got on a flight. They currently live in Seattle where he works in. UK_eggplant3314 responded. I was camping in eastern Arizona with a friend of mine. We like to hike in this particular area that's fairly isolated. We found a place probably 14 or 15 miles deep into the forest on small quad bike trails and set up camp for the night. We put out our fire and go into our tents. Probably about 15 minutes go by. I'm reading a book on my phone and what can I only describe as a roar sounds like it's about 50 feet away from our campsite. Never in my life have I been so terrified. I had immediate goosebumps and went into full panic mode. My friend and I both get out of our tents, look around, and don't see anything because it's dark as hell, but run as fast as we can and just hop in the car. Immediately drove off and found a motel about an hour drive away. I will never forget that sound. LVE seen bears in real life and looked up what a bear roar sounds like and it was nothing like it. The one we heard was almost high-pitched and just filled me with immediate dread. No clue to this day what it was, but I am glad we noped the fuck out of there. We came back the next day and everything was as we left it other than the coals in the fire were spread around a bit. There was no wind that night, so I don't know what happened. I haven't gone back to that area since and I have no desire to. Whatever made that noise definitely didn't want us there. Captain Nemo 42 responded. My little brother and I were tossing a baseball around near dusk at the bottom of our property, 30 wooded mountain acres way in the middle of nowhere. It had gotten dark enough that we were just about to call it quits when we heard the single most horrifying scream we've ever heard coming from the trees just beyond the edge of the clearing. Imagine a woman screaming in mortal agony, writhing in the most wretched torment imaginable, every tortured scream from horror movies, war movies, anything you've ever heard, nothing compared to this. Even now, decades removed from hearing it, the hair on my arms and neck stands up just thinking of it, and it's made even worse by the realization of what it actually was. A mountain lion. Full-grown female mountain lions scream loudly when they're in heat, and it sounds like a human woman being torn to pieces by the devil himself. To hear that, 2 kids alone in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, was about as terrifying as it gets. I grabbed his arm and ran scrambled fear levitated up the hill faster than ever before or since. It's been 25 years, and I still haven't fully puckered. /the_swampman responded. Many years ago I went with my then girlfriend to one of her female friends' houses, who was married to a guy LD never met before. I'll call them Jack and Jill so I can tell the story a little easier. We played cards with them for a couple hours and it was a good time besides an odd feeling I had the whole time I was there. Something just didn't sit right with me being there with them in their home. The best I can explain it is that I was having an anxiety nervous-like feeling, but having no reason to feel that way. After leaving I told my girlfriend the feeling I had and that I didn't think we should go back there again because something wasn't right. Fast forward several months to a year or so later, I forget the exact timeline, Jack murders Jill in that same home, Mag dumping her with his semi-automatic pistol before killing himself with one of the last rounds. No motive. Really horrible stuff that sent shock waves through the community. And it's the only time LVE ever had that feeling. /Owen 4355 responded. Picture it, 1994. I was 18 and waitressing in a sports bar. A comedy club was upstairs. One night a comedian kept visiting between sets. He was funny and charming, and he seemed quite smitten with me. He asked me out to late-night breakfast. If you've ever been in hospitality, you know we go out and eat at 3 a.m. I changed after my shift and waited a few minutes for him. I realized I really didn't know this person, and I should not let him in my car. I decided to be smart and GTFO. A few years later, I was absent-mindedly flipping through a People magazine at a friend's house. That is when I saw my comedian date, Vince Champ, had been arrested as a serial rapist. His favorite target was young college girls, and they finally caught him after putting the puzzle together between victims and his campus circuit. Holy shit, I dodged a bullet. I think he may still be in jail. He was that terrible. You/miserable voice 9146 responded. I was a high school teenager around 13. I'm petite and look way younger, so looked at least 10/11ths. I was in my school uniform on my way to school, and our local shopkeeper stops me. Starts talking to me as usual and asks me what my plans are for the day. I look down at my uniform and tell him I'm going to school. He asks me if there's anything interesting happening, and I responded with, as a matter of fact, we have a mini trip for my geography class. So he offers me a few snacks, which I declined. Now, the reason I declined it was because he was speaking to me from the back door of the shop and asked me to come to the back storeroom to collect the free snacks. I started feeling really strange and declined and said I have to go, I'm getting late. He then asked me for my number and I got freaked out and said I don't have a phone and ran. I remember him shouting something at me, but I was too scared to hear him out. When I got back from school, I told my parents about it and my father went storming to the shop to confront. Well, the coward of a man hid while the owner of the shop apologized. It made me wonder, if I was a naive teenager who actually walked in for the free snacks, thinking he was being friendly, what would this grown man have done to me? Keep in mind, he looked like he was in his early 30s and I was 13 in my school uniform, looking like a 10-year-old. You/Pokemon responded. When I was looking for a new place to rent in a few years back, I found something not far from the house I was leaving, and to my surprise the front door opened to reveal someone I knew from school. They were a few years younger, which rankled me a little, but that wasn't why I noped, and didn't remember me. As we were talking, I started to get this sense of danger. I couldn't explain it, everything the guy was saying sounded reasonable and the price for the room was about average for the time, but something about him was very unsettling. This guy was skinny and normally I wouldn't feel threatened by someone with his build, but there was something that was setting off alarm bells. It was at its worst when I was being shown the room and I had my back to this guy. It was like I could his eyes boring into my skull or something. I maintained a polite facade but left shortly after that, claiming I had a few other places to check out that day. About 18 months later I was driving past and the place had police tape all over it. I tried to find out what had happened online but couldn't find anything. To this day I hesitate to call out to people I remember from that time if I see them. The above memory is a reminder it's been many years and I have no idea what they're like now. You/blonde axolotl responded. My ex had been planning to have me killed and make it look like a home invasion. His behavior had shifted in a very odd way the week before. I found out later he had a woman pregnant behind my back and had planned to move her in and ship my kids off to the state. Their dad is already dead. He wanted to collect my life insurance. I got up right after he left for work that early morning, got dressed in the first things I could grab, woke up my kids and told them we just had to go. I told them not to ask questions right then, that we just had to leave. The door that lead from our garage to the inside of our house was always religiously locked. That night it had been left unlocked. In the weeks leading up to this, our security alarm had been bypassed and he tried to blame my oldest son when my son didn't even know how to do that kind of thing. My husband taught someone else how to do it. You/ecstatic avocados responded. My great-grandma lives at the far end of a neighborhood, right next to a big, busy street, so there are suspicious characters by her house often. When I was a kid, I visited her every weekend, and one time when I was 11, I was sitting on the living room floor and I heard these two people arguing in Spanish. I hear a lady screaming at the top of her lungs, and having gone to Arizonan schools all my life, I recognize every cuss word. Curious, I went to the kitchen and peeked through the window which looked out onto the street, and something didn't seem right. I felt like I should duck, and the moment I did, the lady pulls a gun out and starts shooting. The man she was arguing with was out of my view, so I didn't know what happened to him, but I was the only witness to that crime. You/sharkhotub responded. About 3 weeks ago now, I was blackwater diving off the coast of Boynton Beach, Florida. For those that don't know, blackwater diving involved being dumped with a light buoy to drift over hundreds of feet of water in the Gulf Stream at night. The light buoy attracts all sorts of alien critters that come up from the deep to feed, so it's a lot of fun for underwater photographers. Needless to say, as a precaution, all divers must at minimum wear a light on their tank to be seen, and I had accidentally grabbed my blue blinky light. Before I was going to jump in, the captain mentioned that blue blinking lights were used by fishermen to attract big things at night. As a regular shark diver, there's not too much I'm afraid of down there, but something sent a chill down my spine and I switched my light for a regular green glow stick. That very same night, a legendary blackwater diver was on another boat a couple miles north and got full-on impaled in the leg by a huge swordfish. The fish ripped the sword out of his leg and then kept beating him with it, the way they hunt for the big squid down deep. Dude had his leg torn up and had to self-rescue himself from about 100 feet of depth. No idea if he'll be able to walk, let alone dive again. U/Murphy_girl responded. When I was about 13, my little sister and I were deemed old enough to see a movie on our own. My mom was in the mall working out in the gym and told us to get her when the movie finished. About 15 minutes into the movie, a man with a backpack sits in the seat next to me. The theater was almost empty. Max 10 people total. Well, my sister and I were both overwhelmed with a bad feeling. But we didn't think to just move, we were frozen. After about an hour the man gets up and walks out, but he leaves his backpack. Right after he left, my sister and I ran to get our mom. Unbeknownst to us, an older couple in the theater also got a bad feeling and called the cops, not even getting a manager. They took his info from his bag and he was wanted for kidnapping and sexual assault. U/deleted responded. We were driving back from an impromptu family vacation. My husband and I were both driving cars, too many people, not enough alert drivers, and I was following him. We were in the left lane passing a truck and I suddenly had an overwhelming feeling that we needed to slow way down and move over immediately. I called him and told him that we needed to get over, go slower than the truck, and turn our hazards on. He thought I was a little crazy, but he's learned to listen to my gut feelings and did it. Suddenly we ran into a freak ice storm and the truck slipped off the road, the car that went past us on the left slid into oncoming traffic, and 3 other cars behind us proceeded to slide off the road. There was a big dip on the side of the road and one of the cars even tipped over. We somehow came through unscathed and made it home safely. Another time I was driving to work and I was behind a work van with ladders on top of it. It wasn't particularly busy on the highway, but someone was behind me somewhat close. I had a horrible feeling wash over me that I needed to move over right away. I moved one lane over about 15 seconds before one of the ladders flew off the van. It hit the road right next to me and the car that was behind me ran over it a little, but luckily wasn't impaled or anything. I've had this feeling several times in my life and have even cancelled entire vacations over it. I don't know if anything would have happened for several of them. U/big time 1158 responded. In Iraq ca 2006. Was on a foot patrol through a muddy area along the Euphrates River. Myself and my team were walking down this pathway in a somewhat open field along the river and I look to my left and see a 55-gallon drum laid on its side and I noticed that we were about to walk parallel to it. I then looked down a bit to my front right and saw a very soft glow coming from the dirt. It was dusk at this point. I turn to my team and say I think we need to turn around, and as we start walking away a big-ass explosion goes from under my feet and launches me through the air. A gunfight ensues as the remaining teammates start shooting back and I regain my scruples to return fire. After a short while we contain the scene and the look at the crater. The bomb left a crater that was about 8 feet wide and 5 feet deep. The bomb crew people said it was buried too deep and probably why it didn't kill me. The drum on its side was a marking object so the trigger guy could line us up with the explosive from a distance. The glow I saw was the dusk sunlight glinting off a buried wire that was connected to the bomb. None of my team died or was injured. We turned around just in time. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Leave your own stories down below, I would love to read them. If you would like to see more videos like this, please like and subscribe, it helps me out greatly.